This is the Comics Alternative Interviews. More conversation with Rich Tommaso. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Paul, and we're two academics talking about comics.
That's right. And on this interview episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Rich Tommaso. His new series from Image Comics, Spy Seal, is in its third of 4 issues right now. And Rich and I have a great conversation talking about the new series as well as some of his previous comics. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts will be anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But you know, every now and again, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
Yes, DCBS is full of great discounts. A way that you can take advantage maximally of those discounts is to check out the great bundles that they have. Those bundles are often at 35 to 50% off, and you can get a whole bundle of DC or Marvel or Valiant or DC Young Animal sets that are priced phenomenally. So check out those bundles from DCB Service. And if you're looking for work by Rich Tommaso, our guest today, you can find Pete and Miriam, graphic novel from Boom Studios, Clover Honey's 20th Anniversary Edition. Both of those are at DCBS at 30 and 25% off, respectively. You can also find trade collections of his previous Image series like Dark Corridor and She-Wolf at DCBS for 40% off. So phenomenal discounts that you can't find really anywhere else. Check out Discount Comic Book Service.
Yeah, and in fact, after listening to this interview today, go to DCB Service and get Rich Tommaso comics so you can immerse yourself in his comics world. Mm-hmm. That's dcbservice.com. You gotta go there. It's imperative for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Do it.
Yes, do it. Well, Paul, I had a wonderful time talking with Rich Tommaso about Spy Seal, which his third issue came out just this week as we record this. And we have one more issue that's going to be coming out on November 22nd, and then the trade will be released on the 24th of January. Now, we talk about, Rich and I talk about the series and the upcoming trade, but we also talk about a number of his other titles as well. And we had a great time. I'm sorry you weren't able to join us for that conversation.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to join you. If it's possible to have interview envy, I definitely have it in this case that you got to talk to him because I love his wide-ranging imagination. I was a Clover Honey fan for a long time, and yeah, I mean, I had it on my shelf, loved it, and Pete and Miriam as well, actually. I had that on my shelf too. But man, when Dark Corridor came out, and then She-Wolf, and then Spy Seal, it just felt like he was hitting all the cool genre nerves that I adore. So so cool that you got to talk. Can't wait to hear your conversation with Rich.
Yeah, and in fact, he talks quite a bit about his love of genre. So let's go ahead and listen to the conversation.
Awesome.
I'm pleased to have back on the Comics Alternative Rich Tommaso. His new series, Spy Seal, began in mid-August, and in fact, issue number 3 of Spy Seal came out today, October 18th, as we're doing this interview. Rich, welcome back to the Comics Alternative.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. When I saw your drawings of Spy Seal up on Instagram, let's say over the past year, I was immediately intrigued because the art seemed to be strikingly different from what I had noticed in She-Wolf, and it just had a different tone. And, obviously something that was a little more offbeat, fun. And I'm curious about the genesis of this project because it's very different from your previous series, both She-Wolf and Dark Corridor. Where did this idea come from?
So the idea was it was a comic that I did when I was like, I came up with it when I was like 13 or 14 years old. It was inspired by reading Usagi Yojimbo comics and watching a lot of Danger Mouse cartoons that were on Nickelodeon back in the 80s. And yeah, as a kid, it was basically my way of, I did this a lot, where it was my way of creating my own Danger Mouse comics by coming up with something very similar. But yeah, it's something I haven't, very little thought about over the years, since then. I mean, I drew about 3 or 4 comics of it, and then it became then I switched to a comic strip for some reason, where it was called British Agents, and I did about 5 weeks of that. So yeah, from about, 6th grade into the first year of high school, I drew it, and then I went on to other things, and yeah, just hadn't thought about it for a while, and I just decided to just draw a sketch of it one day and throw it up on Facebook, and it seemed like it had pretty amazing response to this sketch I put up. So I was like, wow, maybe I should revisit this and see how I would do this as an adult, how I'd approach something like that.
Is this the only case where you have taken something that you first created as a kid and then turned it into a more, let's say, sophisticated ongoing comic, or is this kind of new, this experience?
It's basically a new experience. I don't think I ever used anything from the past. The only thing I've used, I had my very first comic, which was Cannibal Porn, was this comic I did for Eros Comics back in '93. That was a character that I kind of created after art school, and I always wanted to do a comic with this character, Fran, and I kind of keep her alive every once in a while. I'll go back to that character. She's in Cannibal Porn, but she returns to comics in The Horror of Collier County, a book I did in 1998 for Dark Horse. And when I did my Recoil, my self-publishing stint, I did a comic called Don't Look Back with that same character again, Fran, and even her daughter, who's about 9 or 10 years old in Collier County, is now like a teenager in that. So besides her, no, I always tend to come up with something new, but this is the first time I've actually revisited something that I drew when I was really little. So it's interesting.
Well, I mean, how different is the Spy Seal that we've seen, let's say, in these first 3 issues from your younger Spy Seal that you created years ago?
Well, I think these days, no matter what genre I approach, I love working in genre, but whenever I do approach that, I always tend to approach it more realistically than what I have in my mind. I'll think okay, I want to do a hard-boiled crime comic. Like with Dark Corridor, I was just thinking, okay, I'm just going to do this crazy, over-the-top, action-packed, action movie kind of crime story. But it ended up being more about character, and more the characters had more to say, and it ended up being, there was a little bit more to the story and a little bit more to the characters to kind of make them a little, more believable than when I first started out. So it's the same thing with this. I'm like, well, it's spies, and I want it to be fun, but I tend to not go too crazy into fantasy world, like 007 kind of fantasy world with it. It is a teen book, because when I was thinking about doing it, I was like, well, I don't see why the tone of it should be any different than when I was a kid. Something like this, which really, the thing that I'm doing now is more inspired by Tintin than anything else, than anything that I was that I had read as a kid, or any television cartoons I watched as a kid. And so when I read Tintin, I think, well, this is, it holds my interest, and it's, for young readers, but it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like something that would be for young readers. And I think adults can really get interested in it, even though it doesn't really have any adult themes to it. So I thought, let me try to do a story like that, where it's not necessarily aimed at kids, but it's something that the story is engaging, and I try to make it interesting for myself to read, where without having to put any kind of adult themes in there, it wouldn't really it wouldn't benefit from any kind of violence or sexual situation. Like, none of that would enrich the story anyway, or make it more interesting and for an adult to read anyway. So that's what I was kind of aiming for, something that was not necessarily just for kids, but something that maybe adults could get into, even though it's not really, your usual fare that you see on TV or when you read adult comic books. Hergé's Tintin, I think, is a great example of, I guess, how to wrap your brain around Spy Seal and the kind of things you're doing there. I mean, there is this almost spy aspect of Tintin. I mean, obviously it's adventure story. And that's also what's going on in Spy Seal, because we see over the first 3 issues, he goes from, let's say, one country or one city to another. So there's something always on the move about your protagonist, Malcolm Warner, Spy Seal, just as there is with the Tintin stories. Yeah, I definitely wanted it to travel around. I mean, that's I think one of the things that actually holds most people's interest with Tintin is just that it kind of takes you on this journey to all these different places around the globe. That immediately makes it interesting. And I thought, let me do that. Let me write this so that we can just have them travel around to different places. And the other thing I thought was, well, it's a spy comic, so I thought, let me choose a point in time in this first series. It's the 60s, and I thought, well, I'll talk a little bit about what the political climate might have been like in the 60s, and that way it would give it something a little more, give something a little more to the writing side of it than just an adventure comic. So.
Yeah. You mentioned your love of genre, and it got me thinking that the vast majority of the work that you've put out is genre-based in some form or another. I mean, your previous series, She-Wolf, was, horror suspense. And then before that, as you mentioned, there was Dark Corridor, which was more hard-boiled crime. And even the earlier comics, you had mentioned Collier County. There's 8.5 Ghosts, or horror. And the only thing I can think of off the top of my head where you're not necessarily working in a particular genre are your Miriam and Pete stories. Other than that, though, you seem to really thrive within genres. Now, with Spy Seal, obviously we have the espionage spy genre. What is it about that genre that draws you to focus on this time around, as opposed to, let's say, horror or crime?
Well, the thing that was exciting about it for me was thinking about how I hadn't approached this material since I was a kid. I also realized I'd never really played around with the spy genre, and I thought, well, that's something I haven't done, and it'd be really fun to do that. So I thought, that'll be great, because I love approaching genres that I haven't tried out before. And I said, well, this will be challenging. And I had read a few John le Carré novels, and I've certainly seen a bunch of spy movies, a lot of them that are kind of based on the same material like John le Carré. And I thought, no, this would be a really fun genre to jump into. And I don't ever do anything even remotely political. And I thought I could just, it is for kids. It is supposed to be a fun comic, but I thought, let me try to put a little bit of that in there too, a little bit of political awareness for that time period into the story. And just it was interesting to try something new.
And I guess since you wanted to write not just for adults but also to younger readers, that is why you chose to use animals as characters as opposed to humans. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do remember that I did sketch. I did do some drawings, some sketches of Spy Seal back in 2001 or 2 or something. I was thinking about him again, and I was trying to make it like super realistic. I said, and I drew this picture of this girl in like a wetsuit, and so really she appeared like as a seal because she was always in this wetsuit, and you would just see her face. And I thought this time around, I said, no, we don't, like, I don't want to go that far into reality. Like, just as far as the artwork, as far as the characters, like, it'd be fun to just draw them as animals and not really have to go into any explanation of that. You know, I mean, the title says it all, so it kind of gives you an idea of that the cast of characters is going to be a bunch of animals. And I actually really love drawing cartoon animal characters. I realized I really missed doing that because all through childhood, that's all I drew. Even when I started art school, the first year that I was in art school, I was always drawing like Cerebus or some anthropomorphic character. So it was something that I had mostly done all through my childhood, but hadn't approached until I did this story.
Well, you know, as you were sitting down, kind of mapping out what you wanted to do in this first narrative arc of Spy Seal, which is called The Court and Still Phoenix, what went into the decision process of certain characters being represented as certain animals? I mean, obviously, Spy Seal is a seal, and but like, why choose, let's say, certain animals for Sylvia or Miles McKellar or Kess or Angora or the other characters that we see in the book?
Well, I thought Sylvia would just be great as a bird. You know, she does like kind of, she's very, very talkative and high strung. And then when I drew the first page, I had this idea. Their relationship is very much like the relationship of Midge and Scotty in Vertigo, where there's this unrequited thing going on where she would like to be more than just friends, but he's not interested in her more than that. And, you know, and when I thought of her, I said, yeah, I'll have the very similar setup where he's kind of talking about what's going on with him, and she's sitting there in her workshop and she's painting. And I thought, oh, well, if she's a bird too, I can just have her paint with her feathers. So yeah, there's like little things that come up like that where I'm like, oh, this would, you know, she would be great as a bird. Or a lot of the other characters, though, I just try to think of, you know, what would be fun to draw. In the case of the issue 2, where he's exposed himself to the enemy and he has to kind of go and hide out at this hotel, and they send someone to contact him. In that scene, I used a mouse to kind of give him the lowdown on how to proceed from there, because I thought, you know, the mouse is very small and he could just kind of like pretend he's caught in a mouse trap until Spy Seal can go over and talk to him. So it's just a really like a great way to have someone go in and fill somebody in without having, you know, without being spotted, to send this like little mouse in there.
Yeah, I liked the mouse agent in that second issue. I also appreciate the fact that Malcolm seems to be drawn, as Sylvia tells him, to, how do I put this, rather buxom females. In issue 1, we see Angora, who's described as the buxom bunny. And then in issues 2 and 3, we have Kess, who is a kestrel, who is also on the Zaftig or busty side. And Malcolm seems to be a sucker for those types.
Yeah, I put that into a lot of my comics just because I like with film and television, comics seem to always favor, and whenever there's a lady in distress or a femme fatale or a female hero, they're always this like skinny character. There's like the idealized woman, it seems, to put in these comics is always someone skinny or, you know, like model like. And I just like, that's just my own personal thing of being like, you know what, like I like well-rounded, buxom, chubby ladies. So I purposely put that into my comics where I'm like, you know, this is something that I like to see more of, and it's something that I like to do. I like to, with all of my comics, I mean, even a lot of my horror and crime comics, you'll notice there's always something a little like turning the genre on its head. I don't seem to ever do a genre straight on. I always seem to do something like an odd kind of hook to it. And I'm always trying to think of a different way to approach any genre, any story. And that's part of that. It's like, well, that's the typical thing that you see in almost every comic, but, it would make it interesting and makes it different, but it also kind of displays like my vision of what a beautiful woman is. Mm-hmm. So I try to, it's definitely something I put into a lot of my comics to kind of change that standard, you see.
Yeah. Another thing that is notable about Spy Seal is that Spy Seal and the majority of the characters that we've seen so far are British. And so I'm wondering, why choose, let's say, MI6 or espionage based in the UK or out of the UK as opposed to American espionage?
Yeah, I thought about that too. I was thinking when I started it, I said maybe I could make him an American spy, and I thought, well, but I think a lot of the novels that I've read of spy material, it always just seems so much more interesting, and even when you see if you watch films that are made in other countries like France or Germany, or they still go with the British spy thing because there's just so much interesting history of spies and over the years that come out of that country. It's just there was just something where I was like, no, I need to keep it. I need to keep it in Britain because there's just so much. It's almost like. When you think of Sherlock Holmes, or if you think of classic horror monsters and things like that, it all kind of like derives from like British literature, and I just thought, no, it's just like the perfect place for it, so we'll keep it there.
That makes sense. Another thing I appreciate about Spy Seal is that your protagonist, Malcolm Warner, is not your typical spy hero. In other words, in the first issue, we don't see him as, let's say, a ready-made spy. He is not a spy at the very beginning, and in the first issue, he is approached by someone from Parliament and also MI6, asking him if he wants to be a spy, and he says, "Oh, I've never done anything like that before. Do you think I can do it?" And even into your second issue, he goes on his first mission and kind of screws it up. So, I mean, this is not a James Bond type character. And I like that because this makes Malcolm more of an everyman character. He's not perfect like a James Bond. He has his foibles. Is this something that you wanted to do in representing Malcolm from the very beginning, to make him not a spy who eventually becomes a spy but kind of stumbles his way into spydom?
Definitely, yeah. It's something, a lot of that, I would say, I always leave this out. I always say there was a big Tintin Tintin influence in these books. But the other big influence with this stuff is Hitchcock and the way he approached this kind of material, and he almost always used someone who was not even when he did do the espionage kind of genre, it was always someone being thrown into that, an amateur or someone that was not really involved, was just kind of swept up into that. And I thought, so the first series, wouldn't it be interesting to just show him before he's even a spy? Because at first I just wanted to be like, no, I want to jump in and just have this really exciting kind of spy series. And I thought, well, it's the first one. I'm hoping to do more. So why don't we just take this first series, and it'd be interesting to see him before that, and try to come up with a way that he would get thrown into this kind of intrigue, and it would get the eye of some people, and then he would be recruited to do this. So I thought, it'd be nice to have like a little origin story right from the beginning.
Yeah. Now, this first narrative arc, you said that you wanted to do more stories. This first one's called, again, The Court and Steel Phoenix. And this is it going to be 4 issues?
4 issues, yeah.
And the 4th issue, I think I saw on the Image site, comes out on November 22nd. And then the trade in late January. Is that correct?
Yeah. January 24th is when the trade will come out. And end of November. Yeah, I think it is November 22nd. The 4th issue drops.
Okay. And you do have plans to take this on to further volumes if this first one is successful?
Yeah, I would like to do more of these. I just think it's once I knew that I was going to also kind of play around with like different eras, and I could do stuff that's set in the 60s, and I thought, oh, this is great. I could really do a bunch of different books and just focus on the different points in time in political history. I thought that'd be really great, and so I would love to do more of these. I would definitely love to have a little library. I don't know if I'll have a giant library like Tintin, but it would be great to have a library of these books, and it's been a lot of fun to work on.
So you're saying that if you do go on, if you're able to do other Spy Seal stories, you'd like to skip around in time. So maybe show him perhaps younger, or maybe even having stories where he is older, more experienced in spydom. Yeah. I thought it'd be great to. I was thinking, if I do get to do a few books after a few stories with him, I could always show him in the military. I could do a book about him in the military during World War II, or he would have been around for that, and I could do a story where it's like, okay, well, we've done the espionage thing, and now we can kind of show something a little bit different than that in this issue, Mm-hmm. So yeah, it'd be interesting to do to see how he goes. I could get into the Vietnam War, where he's continuing to work for MI6 and that, and I just think there's so many things I can get into. I would love to do something set in Berlin. Maybe around the time that the wall is about to come down. It'd be really great to explore different moments in history with them. Yeah, you mentioned Berlin. I was thinking maybe something like a Third Man kind of narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my favorite movies.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about wanting to do additional stories for Spy Seal, but I know, and especially with Image creators, that a lot of this depends on how not only the individual issues sell, but also the trades. And I remember when we had you on the podcast last year, you were telling us some lessons that you had learned from doing Dark Corridor, that you had these big plans for the story that you had to unfortunately truncate just because of sales.
Yeah, that's the one thing I'm thinking. I'm trying to. When I started this, there were some people that were like, "Oh, it reminds me of Tintin. You should just do these 52-page books." And I'm like, "Well, I don't. Tintin isn't like it's. I think it's. People get the idea that they're really short books, but they're not, because there's 4 tiers of panels, and there could be up to 20 panels on a page. So I thought, I don't draw quite that much on every page, so I'll make the books about 4 issues long. So I'm trying to keep each story arc about 4 issues so that I can always make sure that I get through a completed story, like not make anything too long. My plan is to keep the personal relationships in the story between characters. So like certain things like that will continue on into other stories, but every 4 issues, I would like it to be a completely different mission, so that in a way they are the trades will be kind of self-contained stories, but there will be a lot of things between the characters, like going on in their lives and things that will continue. But it'd be nice to have a different mission each time.
Yeah.
So
now. I remember, again, you telling us last year that some of the lessons you learned from Dark Corridor you carried over into your construction of She-Wolf to where you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't tell the story in the same way that you did Dark Corridor. And She-Wolf ended up being, I guess, 2 volumes. What was it about She-Wolf that you experienced that maybe you've carried over into your composition of Spy Seal?
I think just trying to keep, like I said, just trying to keep the stories nice and short, and then that way it gives me a better idea of where to go. The thing with Dark Corridor was it was so much of a long setup, and there were so many characters and things to kind of introduce that I couldn't really do less than 6 issues. But as I'm sitting there working on issue 4, I'm already finding out that the sales are dropping like crazy. So it's just a little easier to be able to say, okay, well, there's only 4 issues of this. Maybe I can go and do something else and then come back to this later. So, because we had that talk about She-Wolf, because She-Wolf season 2 just didn't do very well, and that's when I thought, okay, well, I'll do this Spy Seal thing next, and it was suggested to me that, like, yeah, you could always just do something different and then come back to maybe come back to She-Wolf again someday if you wanted to. I guess it gives it time because it gives the trade time to get exposed to a bigger audience. It's 2 years ago was when the Dark Corridor trade came out, and I'm of course I'm getting emails, now that people saying, oh, I just discovered this Dark Corridor. So it's been suggested to a lot of people that want to keep doing something that maybe they go on to something else and then come back to it later, and then that way that last book kind of gets more time to find a wider audience.
So was the reason that you decided to, at least for now, discontinue She-Wolf because of the sales of the second volume or second season, or was there something about the story itself that you kind of got tired of?
It was a little bit of both. I kind of felt like at the time I didn't really have much more to say with the story, but again, it was a situation like where when I was finishing up the 3rd issue, I had already known that I wasn't really going to make any money off of the series because I already saw the sales of the issue 5, which was the first issue of the second series, and the sales were already super low. So I knew, like, okay, well, let me just do the second story and then I'll move on to something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I had wondered if there would be a 3rd volume or 3rd season of She-Wolf. And I thought I remember reading somewhere that you were getting maybe a little tired and you wanted to try something new. And it was around this time that I started to see your Spy Seal illustrations on Instagram, which, again, I found intriguing.
Thank you. Yeah, that was just such a... Yeah, at first I didn't know what I was going to do next, and then once that sketch kind of blew up and I drew some more spot illustrations just to keep the word out for it, I was like, oh, this would be a really fun thing. Maybe this should definitely, maybe I should do this as my next book.
Well, I don't want to sell your previous work short, like Dark Corridor, She-Wolf, and whatnot. But, I mean, there's something about She-Wolf that really stands out among the various titles in your body of work, in that it's really fun. Not that the other narratives haven't been fun, but Spy Seal is fun in a different way, in that, on the one hand, it's serious storytelling, and I think rather sophisticated storytelling, but at the same time, there's kind of a lightheartedness to it. And maybe, I guess, the lightheartedness comes from the fact that you're using animals to represent your characters that, as we mentioned earlier, does appeal to, let's say, an all-age audience. And so I think that lightness gives it a twist that I haven't seen in your other series.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, when I started working on it, I said, I think this is more of something that comes natural to me because I do like I love working in the crime genre and the horror genre, but I feel like so much of that these days seems to be like very, super disturbing, super violent is the way to go with a lot of this stuff. And I'm just not good at coming up with that kind of stuff. I don't think I could really like outdo a lot of people that are doing the super dark, crime and horror kind of material out there. And so it just, this kind of story where it's, I mean, I love drawing these characters going to these like art gallery showings and like flying to different like exotic places around the world. But it just comes more natural for me to just make up a really good story and not really worry about, okay, this is supposed to be a dark story, so I have to come up with something like really, really creepy or disturbing to kind of grab somebody. I'm not really good at that stuff. So I thought going into this too, I said, this will kind of be interesting because I don't have that. I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Like, okay, it's a horror story, so at some point there should be something gory or like deeply disturbing, to grab somebody in this. It's just I'm not really good at coming up with stuff like that. So that's another way that this book is like it's more of it's a much more natural thing for me to write and draw.
Yeah, I think it shows in the storytelling as well as in the illustrations. Well, let me ask you this. What kind of reception has Spy Seal been getting from various reviewers and critics, and how might this reception be different than, let's say, the reaction to your previous series, such as She-Wolf or Dark Corridor?
The reviews have been pretty similar. Like they've been good. Most of the reviews have been very good and very complimentary. As far as readers, I've been hearing a lot more from people that have bought the book and really enjoy the book, especially issue 1. I didn't experience anything like that before. The day issue 1 came out, I just was flooded with emails and tons of people taking photographs and saying, "Oh, I bought this and I can't wait to read it," or "I read it, I love it." So that first day of that first issue was kind of overwhelming. There was just a ton of support and people just saying they went out and got it and loved it. And then I was hearing about people that said their stores had sold out of it, and shop owners were telling me they sold out of it that week or that day. So I was like, wow, so it was a big difference. That's why I was surprised that the numbers were so low on issue 1 compared to She-Wolf and
really?
Yeah, they were much lower than those first 2 books, but it seemed like a lot more people actually went out and bought the thing that day, bought that comic, and that were, I'm sure there were people already reordering those copies after the first week. So yeah, I'm trying. I think I've been, keeping an eye on the sales, and it seems like even though they're not as high as the first issue or first 2 issues of the previous books, Dark Corridor and She-Wolf, they're kind of evening out. There's not this sharp drop, so there's not this big, sales figure for the first issue, but at issue 3, it's still kind of holding steady, where those other books, the numbers had already fallen a lot, not a lot lower, but lower than what Spy Seal's doing. So it seems like across the board, it seems to be selling about like 5,000 copies. And I'm like, well, that's pretty good, because most of the time when I'm working on these things, by issue 4, the thing's already, the sales have already dropped to 4,000 or 3,000 copies. So I think it seems like people are actually going out and buying these things, like they're getting them off the shelves, because otherwise shop owners would not be ordering similar numbers on the 3 issues in.
Mm-hmm. So what I hear you saying is that the difference between Spy Seal and your previous series, Dark Corridor and She-Wolf, is that with Spy Seal, there seems to be kind of a slow and steady, almost tortoise-like movement when it comes to the sales, as opposed to, let's say, with She-Wolf and Dark Corridor, there was something like a sprint at first, but then a significant drop-off.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's what I noticed. Because when I saw those issue 1 numbers, I just kept thinking, well, I've been through this how many 3 times before Dark Order and She-Wolf season 1 and 2, and I thought, oh, if the first issue is this number, then it's just gonna, it always drops to half. So I just thought, that's usually the way it goes, and that's going to happen again. But instead, it's just kind of staying. It's kind of staying at that. It's not really dropping below that first issue very much. So yeah, I think it will be a very slow process, and I think when it gets to the trade, that I'm sure there'll be a big push for that as well. There are a lot of people that kind of reached out and said, I really like this. I can't wait to read it, but I'm waiting for the trade. I heard a lot more of that than I did even with the first 2 books. So it'll be interesting to see, how that will pick up sales as well.
Yeah, I hope that, those sentiments do translate into bigger trade sales for this first volume than you experienced with the earlier series, because, again, this is something that I want to see more of.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I've been writing these stories. The Spy Seal stories are written essentially for that trade. They do not really jump as much as I can help it from issue to issue. Each issue kind of opens with a whole page kind of introducing you to a new place, which is different from from a city or country you're in the previous issue, just to kind of have a smooth transition, because I'm thinking of it more as a book. I'm thinking of, that kind of, that Tintin collection is kind of the ultimate object in this case. Whereas with She-Wolf and Dark Order, having those covers interspersed and kind of interrupting each issue was perfect, because I did quite a lot of jumping around in the story in those comics. So those are much more suited to being read as comic books that were later corrected. But with this book, I knew I really wanted that kind of Tintin, graphic novel feel. So I said, when I'm writing this, I got to be really clever and not really jump, just try to have some transitions by showing you a new place, so that it would work, so that the first page of each issue would work well as you're opening a new issue. But as a graphic novel, hopefully it'll be, a smooth transition as well from scene to scene or chapter to chapter.
Yeah, I mean, place is very important in Spy Seal, and I'm looking through right now issue number 3, which came out just today, and we have Malcolm and Kes on a train heading to another location, and unbeknownst to them, their antagonist Miles McKellar, the double agent, is also on the train. And one of the things that struck me about this third issue is that we have a lot more of Kes. In the first issue, as we mentioned, there was Angora, the buxom bunny, who was, I guess, a character of interest, we could say, for Malcolm. But she ends up getting whacked. But with Kes, we saw her in issue 2. Now we see her. She makes up the majority of issue number 3. And there's this, I find, intriguing relationship between Malcolm and Kes, in that to some degree Kes is a tease. When she comes out wearing the nightgown.
Yeah, she's still trying to test him.
Right. But then at the same time, she's saying that, as a spy, you need to be professional. And if I say kiss me, it's because we need to present a front, but don't take that serious. So she's an intriguing character. I mean, there are a lot of sides to her. How much of her is professional and how much of her might be this almost not really femme fatale, but a tease to some extent. And I'm wondering if you plan on continuing not only into issue 4, but maybe into future narrative arcs, this character Kes and her relationship with Malcolm.
I would like to, I definitely would like to keep them as working together as much as I can on these missions, and I just think it would be interesting. I'm looking forward to doing a second volume of these comics, because I want her to meet Sylvia, and I want to kind of get into that kind of triangle situation a little bit. But I haven't really. I'm still kind of exploring that and thinking like, well, I wonder. I still have to think to myself. I wonder what her feelings are though about him, like when they're not out in the field working. Does she have those feelings for him? but yeah, right now it's just so much of her. A lot of it is just her trying to continuously test him and make sure that he's keeping his emotions in check and paying attention to the real matter at hand when they're on these missions. So, but yeah, I definitely want to keep exploring that, and it'd be great to kind of bring Sylvia back in and see what happens between the two of those characters, in civilian life.
Yeah, I mean, there is quite a bit of potential here for that kind of sexual tension that can drive your story. And you were talking about bringing in Sylvia. There's this really interesting scene in issue number 3 that I've already alluded to when Malcolm is, I don't know, he's doing some work. He's listening in on a device to communicating with agents, and then Kes comes in to go to bed with the nightgown, and he says, I think I'm going to take a cold shower, but he ends up taking a bath, and as he's taking a bath, he's fantasizing about Kes, but then in the middle of the fantasy, Sylvia, or the thoughts of Sylvia, come to him to kind of admonish him about, and she says, you're unbelievable, you don't want me as a mate, even though we've known each other for ages, and get on so well together, but you're immediately head over heels for that tough-as-nails spy in there. And then we see her in the room. Of course, we know she's not physically in the room, but this is Malcolm imagining her confronting him about his own desires.
Yeah, and it brings up, he's thinking of her because it's bringing up the buxom bunny Angora again, and what would Sylvia think now? He's about to have to sleep next to this girl, this other character who he's fallen in love with, and so he's like imagining her, like in a way, just this argument that he's creating in his mind is it puts his mind back onto the work. It's interesting that she's having this little argument with him. There's this kind of like pretend slap, and then the next thing he looks over at the sink and he sees Angora's brooch and starts to see if there's any other compartments and finds a secret message. And so, it kind of like keeps him in check, and he goes back to focusing on his job. So, I thought that would be a very interesting way of like, well, he's got this pretend kind of argument, and which kind of gets his mind off of Cass and kind of inadvertently somehow puts him back on to thinking about his mission again.
Yeah. I want to get back to, I guess, reader reaction to the series, especially the first issue, because you'd mentioned that so many people got in touch with you about this, more than had contacted you with the previous series. And one of the things I noted about the first issue and how it is different from number 2 and number 3 is that there was a backup feature by Joey Weiser, Ninja Fukuro.
Yeah.
And when I read the first issue, I thought, oh, okay, well, in Spy Seal, we're going to have the main story and then a backup feature. But there haven't been backup features with subsequent issues. Now, was this planned? Is this feature by Joey Weisner kind of a one-off? Will we see more backup features in future issues?
I would like to have more. I thought I would have room for more of them in future issues, but I'm trying to. The story kind of took over where I kind of came up with this magic number of like 16 pages for issue, and I thought, well, that with the covers and the opening chapter pages makes a nice, concise 24-page issue. So I wasn't able to do any more just yet, but I would love to do that more often. That's the thing I really love about the first issue. It kind of reminded me of, seeing like Gru in the back of Destroyer Duck or something like other feature that fits so well in with the main feature of the comic. So I thought it was just a great way to launch the thing. But I would love to do that more often, especially in the issues. Like I said, and the trades will just be all story content, but hopefully like in the future I can do more things like that and have shorts that fit nicely with the Spy Seal feature.
Yeah, and Weiser's backup feature does similar things to what Spy Seal does, in that the characters are all animals.
Yeah, it was the perfect thing as a backup. I'm hoping to get Joey to do some more. That'd be great.
Yeah. Do you think that some of the success and reaction that you got from that first issue is due to not just the Spy Seal story, but also the fact that you had a backup feature?
Probably, yeah. I did have a lot of people say they really enjoyed the backup too. So they kind of enjoyed it as a whole package. And there were people saying that, it was great to see some of the back matter. I had some of the social media attention that was in there, and a little bit of writing. I didn't have any room to do any either back matter writing or anything like that in the other issues. But I'd love to do more of that. And people, I really loved the Joey story, and he had drawn that and colored it before I even started drawing the first issue. It's like, this is great. So yeah, hopefully we'll see more of that stuff, and hopefully, like I said, this series can go on for a while.
Also dealing with reader reaction, I wanted to ask you if you have received much commentary about what I see as the text heaviness of Spy Seal. And I don't mean this in a bad way. And in fact, I really privilege the fact that there is quite a bit of text and dialogue in Spy Seal. I noticed that from the very first issue, when we get into the first few pages, that there's just a lot of words there, much more so than I think in the vast majority of the comics out there. Now I like that. There's something, quite literary about that appeals to me. But I'm wondering if you have received much response on the text heaviness of Spy Seal, and not just the first issue, either in the positive or negative direction.
Actually, it's been with that first issue especially, because there was a lot of dialogue, a lot of things to set up. Mm-hmm. I did receive a lot of commentary about that, both good and bad. There were some people that just thought it was too much. Some people thought it was a little bit like too much like political conversation going on in the first issue. So I thought, well, maybe that's just something I need to fine tune and adjust. Like maybe it's a little too heavier on that, lighter on the adventure, and maybe scale back on that. But there were a lot of people that really loved that it took them a while to read, and that there was so much going on, in the dialogue. They didn't expect that, but they enjoyed that it was like a nice full read. But a lot of people said it was a lot for a first issue, so that was great to hear. But yeah, there were other people that were like, wow, this is really text heavy, and it's it goes on a little too much with the political talk. And so
yeah, well, I guess it all depends on how you read comics and what you tend to privilege, text over image or vice versa. I'm looking again at the very first page of issue number 1, and not only is there quite a bit of dialogue between Malcolm and Sylvia, but in that first panel at the very top of the page, you have the front page of a newspaper, which again has a lot of text to it. Now, I tend to read comics. I find myself sometimes overlooking some of the visuals because I first attend to the text, but I know that there's some people who may overlook the text because they're reading the visuals. And I think that's why Spy Seal, and not just the first issue, appeals to me, because it is so dialogue or text heavy that it satisfies that kind of reader that I am.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing with monthly comics that you're only going to get a small piece of every month, and with that, I always have that trouble with the first issue. You either have people say there's not enough going on, or there's too much setup. That's always the two commentaries I hear. It's always like in reviews. It's always the kind of, it's either there wasn't enough, or I don't really know what's going on in this, because you're only giving a short chapter for that first issue. Or they say like, it's all setup, it's all exposition, and it's hard to know how to do that. Like, I know it's the first issue, I'm trying to introduce people to the characters, so I feel like, I want it to be fun to read, but I also want you to kind of get an idea already of who these characters are, and what's going on, and what is the story about, what's who are these characters, and so it's always a tough thing, that first issue. I always feel like I should do enough setup so that you can get so you're properly introduced to not only the story but who the characters are and what their destinies are, that kind of thing. So.
Now, you mentioned that when the trade comes out, obviously we'll have the completed first arc of Spy Seal, the Court and Steel Phoenix, but you're not going to include the short by Weiser. Will there be additional material in this trade? Perhaps the covers of the 4 issues, but are you thinking about including other material that hasn't appeared in the first 4 issues?
No, I'm trying to. I hope this is the right decision, but I think at least for the first one, I would really love to keep it as very much like Tintin, where it's just wall to wall, like the content of the story, just the story content, and nothing else. So not even covers. No covers. Okay. No covers. It's actually going to have. I'm going to have the one chapter drawing, because every issue has like this little circle chapter drawing. And I'll have that to open the book. But beside that, I actually did a completely different cover, more in the style of a Tintin type of book, but just something to entice people to buy the trade. I did a completely different cover for it, but it's something that definitely works as a cover for a trade. And the story, like I said, it was written so that it's really one big piece. So I just kind of want it to be all story content.
Yeah, I'm looking at the cover of the trade, and I'm assuming this is the one that you're referring to. I'm looking at it on Amazon. It's Malcolm. He's surrounded by statues of phoenixes.
Yeah, the many
with the yellow background.
That's the cover.
Yeah,
the many MacGuffins. I thought that was the other thing. I thought, well, the whole Phoenix thing is a MacGuffin, but I thought, it would be great if there were like 20 MacGuffin, just 20 misleading things that really don't have anything to do with what the story is really about.
Yeah. Now, you've already mentioned, I guess what we could call a wish list of times, scenarios, historical moments that you would like to place Malcolm for future Spy Seal stories. Well, let me ask you, because, I guess you've wrapped up this first arc. This 4th issue will be coming out on November 22nd. What can you tell me about, if you do it, this next narrative arc for Spy Seal? Like, what kind of mystery and intrigue will there be? Where will he be? Have you really fleshed that out yet?
I haven't. I have an idea. Like, I have notes for another book, but I haven't really fleshed out the story. I'm thinking, unless I get. A lot of times I'll just wake up in the morning and get an entire story idea just flooding into my head, and have to run to my iPad and start typing. But what I have in mind is I would like to do something about the space race. So that's that's. Been reading a little bit about that stuff and writing some notes here and there, but I haven't really haven't come up with an actual solid plan for it. But that's something I would like to do. I was going to do a science fiction story in between the She-Wolf seasons, but they wanted me to just keep working on She-Wolf. They were like, we already have way too much science fiction in Image, just keep working on She-Wolf. So it was a story I really wanted to do, and I've been thinking about how I could take parts of that story, and there are a few things in that script that I could use and do as a Spy Seal comic set during the, the space race. So that's kind of what I'm thinking on for the next one. I thought, again, it brought up Tintin. I was thinking about the explorers on the moon and Destination Moon. I thought, it'd be great to do something along those lines. It'd be great to do something in that kind of spirit. So we'll see.
So you think that might be the direction this next narrative arc, if you do it, will take?
Yeah, so far that's the one thing that's at the front of my mind for it. There's nothing else has really held my interest as much as that idea. So I'm pretty sure that might be the direction that I'll go with in the next one.
So it seems like the majority of your attention right now is devoted to Spy Seal, but is there anything else that you're working on that you could share with me? Any like shorter works for anthologies or an idea for another series?
Well, I've been working on a comic I self-published with my Recoil imprint called Dry County. And I've been thinking about trying to finish up that as well. I'm not sure what I'll do with it, but it's a book that I did 76 pages of altogether and still has like quite a bit more to go before it's finished. The whole thing was written out. I'd written the entire thing. It's one of the few times I've actually done this where I really wrote the entire script out and even rewrote it a bunch of times. So it's one of those things where when I'm drawing the pages, I don't really deviate from that script because I spent so much time writing it. So I'd like to finish it up. So I'm working on that whenever I can on the side. I'll do that and then figure out where I can go with it someday. But I'd love to finish that story.
And so would you publish that as, I guess, a self-contained graphic novel, if you want to call it that?
I could, if I did, I could do it that way, but or else I could do it. It'd be great to do it as a series because when I self-publish it, I had like a short run that I did of it under Recoil. Every issue was just like this perfect 24-page chapter in the story. So I thought, oh, that's great, like how they, around 24 pages or so, that's where there's like a real turning point in the story. So I thought, if I can, I'll do it as a series. If not, I'll just, over time, I'll finish it up and try to publish it as a graphic novel.
Well, Rich, I want to thank you for taking the time and talking with me for the Comics Alternative about this new series of your Spy Seal. And, again, the third issue of Spy Seal came out today as we record this. The last in this first narrative arc comes out next month, and then the trade in January. Yep.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great. Your next series, we'll have you on again.
Awesome. Yeah.
Derek, it's always fun to listen to your interviews with creators. I think hearing from Rich Tommaso was just a total treat. So I'm really glad that you got to talk to him for us.
Yeah, it was fun talking with Rich. Now, we had him on the Comics Alternative a year and a half ago, right around the time that She-Wolf was just beginning. So it was great to have him back on the show to talk about Spy Seal. And it's really interesting. One of the things I had mentioned, if you recall, is the fact that, as much as I like his earlier Image series like She-Wolf and Dark Corridor, there's something about Spy Seal that really appeals to me. And I think it may, part of it may be the espionage genre and the anthropomorphic twist that he gives to that. But I think along with that, there seems to be some kind of enjoyment that emanates from the text that, while it's there with his other comics, just is really apparent here in Spy Seal. So if our listeners have not yet checked out Spy Seal, again, the third issue came out just this week. We strongly recommend that you do so.
Yeah, myself included. I am sad that I missed the interview, but I think if I was there, I probably would have just been hanging out in the back like a yelping puppy because I'm also a huge fan of Spy Seal. I just would have, when you guys were talking about it, I just would have been like, yeah. So, but folks should definitely check that out if they haven't yet. It's fun. It's great fun.
That's great. And again, I want to thank Rich Tommaso for taking the time and being on the Comics Alternative once again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to build your Rich Tommaso library, one place that you can start at a great price is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, and there you're going to find, as Paul mentioned at the top of the show, a number of Rich Tommaso titles, but you can find other comics there as well at great discounts. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your Tommaso books there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about this interview. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
You can also correspond with us by email at twoguys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email us individually. Derek's at derek@comicsalternative.com, and I'm at paul@comicsalternative.com. We love getting feedback. We love to hear what you liked, what you enjoyed, what you'd like to hear. All that is very welcome. So get in touch with us.
That's right. You can also find us and correspond with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right.
Yeah, and, as Paul said, we do like to hear from you, so get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about not only this interview with Rich Tommaso, but the other episodes that we do. So let us hear from you.
Absolutely.
Until next time, I'm Derek.
And I'm Paul. Have a good one.